There we go. Recording has started, and this is the June 3rd, 2021 Crossplane community meeting. Feel free to add yourself as an attendee here in the list, or folks can kind of crowdsource that effort there. Let's jump into milestones and releases. Got a number of things going on there. We just yesterday did a series of patches for 1.0, 1.1, and 1.2. They are all linked directly here in the agenda document. Dan, you drove those releases yesterday. Do you want to give us a quick overview or a summary of what was in each of those patch releases to those back versions?
Yeah, sure. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you great, Dan.
Awesome, thank you. I'm on mobile, so I might be cutting out here. We have an internet outage, but yeah, in those patch releases, basically all that was included was an update to how the lock resource is managed. So for folks who have tried to uninstall Crossplane or potentially upgrade from one version to another, basically we created that singleton lock resource, which kept track of package dependencies. And so when you tried to uninstall Crossplane, we put a finalizer on there that we never take off, which meant this resource would basically hang around forever. So if you uninstalled Crossplane and then tried to reinstall it, for instance, especially in 1.0 releases, patches on that branch, you'd have issues because the resource would already exist and it couldn't take ownership and that sort of thing. So the changes here basically made it such that if there's no packages installed, we release the finalizer on that singleton resource, which means that if you uninstall all packages and then uninstall Crossplane, then you'll have a totally clean uninstall, and that would obviously help upgrades as well. The one other PR that was included or backported to these branches was around the controller config. Basically, we override values in a controller config when we're creating the controller deployment. And there was just one value that was not being considered there. So it went ahead and made sure that that was considered. So not anything super major, but is super helpful for folks that want to consume that functionality.
Awesome, Dan. And yeah, thanks for driving those patches, backporting them to a number of previous releases as well too, and getting those released yesterday. So the release notes here for 1.2.2, 1.1.2, and 1.0.1 will be pretty much the same because the same three fixes went into all of them. So let's talk then about the upcoming release, the 1.3. We are still in active development cycle for the 1.3 release. The expected release date is at the end of this month, June 29th. So we still have a few more weeks until feature freeze, code freeze type of thing, where we'll stop development on active features and go into more of a bug fix type of mode. So we still have time to get things in and keep making progress here. So as is typical for this meeting here, we'll talk about the investments in work that's going in to the 1.3 release on the board here, but this is also a forum for the entire community to speak about what they're working on, what they would like to see as well too, what's a priority for them, etc. So this can definitely be an open dialogue as usual. We did take a pass through the 1.3 board since the last community meeting, so this should be in more reflect some of the work that's going on right now. One PR that we have open here, and I think that Nick and maybe Moaf and Dan as well too were meeting with Ben to talk about this PR, or was that on the agenda for later on today about the multiple pass in a composition?
Yeah, it's going to be in like the technical discussion section.
Okay, good. So yeah, we can get into that then as well too later on.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so we've got some closed PRs that are going to be included in the 1.3 timeframe. This is 1.3 is the Crossplane specific release, and providers are not tied to that same release cycle. So you may see some things on this board that are from the providers, but they're not necessarily tied to the same release cycle. One particular merged item that was completed recently that of note, and there's many of them though, is that Lambda support for AWS got merged in recently, and so that will be included in the next version of provider AWS. It's in the done column. Beyond that, we have a nearing initial completion as well too, is some of our integration testing that Rahul has been working on as part of the LFX mentorship program. We'll talk more about a update on that and progress on that as the mentorship program is drawing to a close later on in the agenda. But that's also something that will be included in 1.3. Dan, your face is on a couple of these as well too. Do you want to give like a high level summary for some of the important items that progress is being made on, or the general themes for 1.3 for yourself?
Yeah, sure. So a number of them are just kind of like smaller bug fixes. And I have one in particular that's open that I'll leave for discussion later on. But I'm trying to make sure I'm on the right place with y'all here. So the back off is basically just using things that are common against providers. Or common with providers, some back off functionality that we implemented, and just adding those to the core Crossplane controllers, which shouldn't be too big of a diff. And I've got that in progress. The second one there in the in progress column, unhealthy configuration revision. Ben and I were actually discussing that this morning, and it will also be deferred to the technical discussion portion. And then the only other ones here that I'd say would be good to talk about now is we have these two in the accepted column around supporting package registries and package pull credentials. These are things that could easily have support added, but we may want some discussion around what users are desiring this functionality before we move forward. That's why we haven't made progress there yet. So I'll probably be following up in the general channel and that sort of thing around that.
Awesome, Dan. Thanks a lot for that update there. And then Muaf, it looks like we have in progress too now support patching from common data sources. I thought that was an interesting ticket there. Do you want to give a quick status on the update or the impact or benefits of that issue as well too?
Yeah, sure. So there's this problem of like in composition, some users want to use values from like common data sources like AWS account ID or some other like values that do not exist on composite resource or on the composition, or they vary like between the instances or like namespaces that the claim is created in. So we wanted to have a way for like users to specify a config map or a secret or some resource to be used as the source for such values. But we also have another issue that is about referencing any resource from the managed resource. So for example, in the managed resource, you can actually refer to an arbitrary resource and get a value and like apply it to the managed resource. I mean, like that's the feature request, not the implemented one. So what we thought in that issue is that we can actually get the common data resource patching by implementing this other generic referencing mechanism, which has an example, I think below. Yeah. The one at the top of my comment. Yeah. So that one, like it's, you see the references array. So that's like a array of like arbitrary references on the managed resource itself. So you don't have to use composition. You can you can use this field. You will be able to use this field even if you're just creating managed resources. And by reusing that in composition, we will achieve also the patching from common data source feature. And I think I have a draft design doc now, but also like implementation will be like following that at the same time. But I haven't opened the PR yet.
Oh, interesting, Moff. So you're saying then that will we be tackling then the general problem, the full general problem of 1770 here as part of this?
Yes, exactly. Well, actually, like the
Ooh.
PR will fix that one, 17 and 70, so 1770, and that in turn will enable the issue that is in progress column.
That's awesome. I don't know if I had heard that, but I'm super excited about that because I think that cross-resource referencing was a really powerful feature and opens up a lot of scenarios. In addition to the more constrained thinking of being able to patch from like config maps and other resources, et cetera. So that's super interesting. I'm really excited to hear that.
Yeah.
Muvafiq, did you are you thinking this will get into 1.3?
Well, I was actually going to ask the code freeze date, exact date for that, or the bug freeze.
Yeah, so I guess it would be in 2 weeks. So we have 2 full weeks after this one, I think, until code freeze. That being said, all of that, none of this actually requires, at least from my understanding, I imagine this would go into Crossplane runtime and then filter out to the providers, because this would be implemented on the managed resources. So we may not be subject to those constraints, and it might just roll out as the providers have their release cadence. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome.
I don't think we would expect changing core crossplane repo.
Awesome. That's great because that gives us a little more flexibility too. So you don't have to be rushed, but we can get out there as soon as it's ready. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe we could talk about it later on because it might be getting into too deep technical details right now. But I'm curious. I think I don't have it fully in my mind how the generic cross-resource references solve some of the patching things here. Like, if, for instance, if you wanted to patch from a config map and then also do a transform on it at the same time, I'm not sure if I fully get that one yet. So we can take that offline or talk about that later on in the detailed technical section.
Yeah, I'm thinking of like, having that patch very similar to composition one, but like, I yet to flesh out the details.
Cool. I'm super excited about this. Like cross-resource references is really cool. So that's exciting. Okay, so then that would attacking that would take one of the high items that we have been in demand from the community since 1.2 as well too, or before that actually, if we're being honest here about how long we've been talking about this one. So that's super exciting. Anything else on the board here, or issues of importance to the community, or anything that people want to bring up in the context of the 1.3 milestone that's coming up within the next month?
I think like not directly related with core crossplane, but we have 2 PRs in ACK, and I've been like making them ready to merge for generating like more stuff in AWS. So with these 2 PRs merged, we will have late initialize and also up-to-date check implemented, which means we will probably get like update functionality for a lot of generated resources now. That's gonna be nice.
Nice. And there's most certainly been a lot more resources that have been added in by maintainers, but also from the community as well too, for resources they need in AWS that are taking advantage of the code generation. And the more that we flesh out the functionality of the generated resources, the more capabilities that the community itself gets in new resources that they're generating. So that's fantastic that to have progress on that as well too. Is there anything blocking upstream in ACK, Muwafiq, to get these in, or is it all on our side or the ACK side to finish these?
Yeah, it was blocking like the PR was open. The PRs were open like for a long time now, like 1 or 2 months. But it was like both waiting for a review, and also I didn't add test meanwhile. But now like after all the business, now I was able to like add the test and like to make sure all the resources are correctly generated. So now they're ready. So right
Awesome.
now the only blocking thing is getting a review from Jay.
Fantastic. And Nick, what's on anything on your mind for 1.3 as well too?
I
have nothing that I'm personally leading. There's a couple of things that I think we already have planned to talk about, like the many-to-one patching and things like that. But no, I haven't directly touched Crossplane in a while.
Awesome. Yeah, and so, the floor is still open for folks that want to bring up issues or features for 1.3. And also any folks, I said there's a number of contributors on the call here that I know have active PRs. So if there are like work that you're doing right now, like either building or reviewing, feel free to add it to this board or send me a DM to add issues to this board here so we have the full state of what everybody's working on across the entire community reflected on the board here.
Hi, Jared, here's Sean. I pinged you earlier because of an issue basically Jan opened. It's a little further down, maybe that's worth discussing. So background is that we we provisioned Kubernetes clusters, and recently we started rolling out or using the Kubernetes version 1.19. And with the version 1.19, AWS stopped automatically tagging the associated subnets with the shared tag, meaning that if you, for instance, spin up a load balancer within Kubernetes, it ends up basically in the wrong subnet or isn't provisioned at all, meaning that's basically an issue down the line. So we have to basically tag the subnets manually, and then we had in our team a few discussions because the AWS API provides basically the methods of creating tags and deleting tags on various resources. You could do it specifically for subnets. I believe you could do it for all kinds of EC2 related resources. But really, I wanted to get basically your opinion on how that best fits basically into Crossplane right now, because we didn't want to start just implementing something, because tags can be added through multiple pathways, basically throughout the API. For instance, if you create a subnet yourself, you can automatically pass a few tags, but you could also do it through something separate, for instance, through this create tags method. But that basically also gives a few issues that, for instance, apparently you can only have 30 or 50 tags with the subnet or with the resource. And I think it's just worth having a look at it. It's like, maybe you have an opinion on that.
So these actions, create tags and delete tags, they are frequently used in a lot of AWS resources where it's available. And in some resources, the tags are just part of the original API. So what we have done so far is to actually add a tags field to the resources and call these in the same controller. For example, for subnet, you would add like a tags array, and then in your controller code, you would like manually write that logic. I think we've got it like in a few places like RDS and some others, like creating a map, checking whether like the tags exist in the remote, or create them or delete the ones that do not exist in the local anymore and such. So instead of like having them as tags as a separate managed resource, we kind of opted for having them on the managed resource itself per resource and call these APIs when we have to. Like in a lot of cases, we don't have to. It's originally part of the API, but in other cases, like EC2 one, we handle that in the code basically without having a separate managed resource.
Okay, so basically that also means that we wouldn't run into any race condition because like different resources are basically trying to manage the tags of the same resource, right?
Well, the tags on the managed resource field, for example, it belongs to the specific subnet. For example, like on the subnet CR, you would have like for provider tags, and the controller would just like reconcile that tags array. So like it would be one entity trying to add or delete tags.
Okay, so basically everything I have met in that resource, like basically if I have 3 tags in there and the controller, the provider or controller would only make sure that those 3 tags are there or not anymore there if I delete that from that array, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
So basically, like returning to the issue, that would mean you would rather recommend not implementing a separate managed resource, or how would you go about like the problem with a cluster EKS cluster resource where basically the subnets are not tagged out automatically anymore? Should that be part of the managed resource of the EKS cluster or separate?
So the tags, how are they? Are they like dynamic? Well, like if there is a place where we can get the values, you can like patch the subnet you create in the composition, like with those values in the tags array. So I haven't checked, but like if subnet doesn't have a tags field, we can add that. So you would actually like put that automation in your custom resources.
Okay.
Let me see.
Yeah, right now we're still managing like most resources, not in one big composition, so they're more loosely cross-plane resources we're dangling around. So that would be right now for our setup at least an issue. But yeah, subnet has a tags.
So I will just link an example of implementation of tags on security group in EC2. So you can take a look at that and like now see how it's being done for that specific resource.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds reasonable, at least. And if there's anything we can, follow up on once we kind of look into that a little more, see if that addresses your use case, Sean, then we can keep that conversation going.
Yeah, thank you so much just for the input.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Sean.
Yep.
Cool. All right. So then maybe we can go ahead and move on to the community topics section after we have wrapped up a 1.3 and milestone section, I think. Right. Dan, I don't know if this was stale here. Was there any like live stream updates for recently? I think the last community meeting we had a couple of them that you had done. Were there other ones? There's a podcast that came out today, I think.
Yeah, that's correct. We don't have any partner. Well, there's probably some with Equinix coming up, but I don't have the exact information on those. So I'll make sure to drop that in Slack when those dates are available. And then, yeah, the podcast from today, but nothing on the schedule other than that for now.
And if Dan, you get a chance, or anybody else on the call, because I don't have it right in front of me, can throw a link to that Day 2 Cloud podcast recording in here. That would be awesome.
Sure thing.
That's on my list of things to listen to and consume. My Crossplane media consumption. All right. Quick update on the incubation proposal. So we are on the final end user interview by the technical oversight committee. I don't know, maybe like 6 or 7 of them by now, I think, and there's one more that is planned to be done today, later on this evening. So that will get finished, and I believe that's all of, once that end user interview is completed, then our 2 COC sponsors can then bring it to the rest of the technical oversight committee, and we can go ahead and move on to the next phase. we've been stuck on this phase for a little bit while we've been organizing schedules and finding the right folks, the right adopters that are willing to be interviewed by the TOC. So thank you to everyone who's on this call and not on the call that has been agreed to be interviewed by the TOC. That's been super, super helpful to help us move forward there. So thank you so much for that. And then I'm definitely hoping for a quick vote after we're into that phase there. But things are looking good with all the support we've gotten from the community. It's been awesome.
Jared, can I throw out a quick related topic real quick?
You sir can, Nick.
I hadn't thought about this very much, just occurred to me right now, but we're part of the incubation vote is getting the Crossplane Conformance program up and running, which allows distributions of Crossplane and Crossplane providers to sort of be certified as conformant, as like a pass basically some integration tests to say that they conform with Crossplane best practices. We've got a couple of those open for the GCP provider and Helm provider, for example, as well as UXP Upbound's distribution of Crossplane. We'd really like to get one open for the AWS provider, but part of running the conformance tests involves making sure that every possible resource in the provider works and can become ready, which is quite labor intensive. If anyone's this is probably not the most exciting thing to help out with, but if anyone is, interested in helping, this is a great way to help the project without doing software engineering. We just need folks to say that they can check a couple of resources and make sure that they can become ready for us. That would be super valuable. I'll understand if it's very boring, but if anyone is interested in helping with that, feel free to DM me on Crossplane Slack, and I would very much appreciate it. And I'm Negs, N-E-G-Z on Crossplane Slack.
Nick, quick question on that. Is it possible to batch or parallelize the efforts of the conformance testing? One person runs conformance tests with the resources in the database group, and then another person runs the conformance tests for EC2, and they can kind of be map reduced back together into a cohesive result.
That's not how they're designed to run, no. So
got it.
I guess it depends. It depends what, I wrote the review process, so maybe I could update it to say that that's a thing that's allowed to happen. But my thinking is that if we can just validate that all of the resources work and maybe get example YAMLs for all of the resources that are known working, then once we know that's the case, it should be a little bit easier for one person to just take all of those.
Oh, I see.
On the tests. But if we ask, if we say, I'm going to go and go through the tens of resources in provider AWS and hit every bug potentially that's there and try and get all of them working and figure them all out, it's going to take a long time. So splitting that up would definitely help there.
Yeah. For what it's worth, the YAMLs in examples folder, they are supposed to work. We validate them before merging. But yeah, you never know. Sometimes we do see cases where example YAML is just not working for some reason.
Yeah.
And also, the last time I did that, the example YAMLs, I tried to have them refer to each other in cases where there has to be a source. For example, subnet has to have a VPC. So it's likely that you might be able to get away with just kubectl apply and checking readiness for most of resources, I would say. But some just take time, like EKS cluster and stuff.
Nice. Yeah, I haven't even tried to look into AWS yet. I know that Hassan started looking at provider Azure and actually found one or two places where that provider is not conformant, which is great. It means we can go fix that now, sort of thing. So it could be that provider AWS goes smoothly because it definitely gets a lot more, a bit more attention than most other providers, being very popular.
Cool, Nick. Yeah, thanks for all the energy and focus you've put on defining the conformance program and getting that in place, man. So as Nick was mentioning, these certification or performance program for both distributions and providers is live, and a couple of PRs are open for that with conformance test results for GCP, Helm, and UXP. And so we want to continue building that out. I know that the IBM Cloud folks are working on one as well too, and then Equinix Metal as well too would be another one. But the more the merrier over there for getting providers certified and conformant. To kind of build out that community there as well too is great. So I moved this agenda item up a little bit in the doc, and then we can go ahead and move down to the LFX mentorship section here too. So for the Linux Foundation's mentorship program, this is the final week of Rahul's semester here with us. It's been an awesome time having Rahul working on the project. And we've all learned a lot. It's been a really good experience there. The final evaluation will be done this week. And Rahul, do you want to kind of give us a final update here on what you're trying to wrap up and complete this week as part of the mentorship program?
Yeah, sure. So the second segment of the mentorship after that first evaluation was mainly based on testing that composition engine. So we had got that provided in NoOp ready, and now the second step was to add composition engine test cases. So I added some basic test cases, which you can see in this PR, which there are some comments by Dan, and I will just update it on that. But yes, the tests cover mainly the two cases in which I mentioned, and yeah, that will be the probably thing I will be making to get to completion by this week.
Awesome. Yeah, it's been great having your contributions, Rahul. Definitely been a meaningful part of the community as you've been working on the project so far this semester. Cool, Dan. Thanks for doing a review here as well too. Sorry, Nick, were you saying something?
I was just going to say I'm excited to hear that the sort of official provider NOP is ready. I was using an ancient, less featureful one that I wrote in the conformance test, so I'd like to change those over to use Rahul's.
Awesome. Good.
I opened a PR for that, as you might see that.
Oh, awesome.
In
I
the
didn't notice that, but that's great. I'll go review that.
Cool. All the better. All right, Dan, do you want to kind of get us an update on the provider GCP updates to use V1 packages, like most notably for GKE?
Yeah, absolutely. I apologize. I can't share my screen since I'm on mobile, but essentially the GCP provider has support for, I don't know, probably like 20 to 30 resources, I believe right now. That might be high, but essentially all of them were relying on a GCP API SDK package. And within that package, there's different levels, and within Google's APIs, there's different levels of maturity. And they use the same vernacular as Kubernetes APIs and in turn Crossplane APIs in terms of V1 Alpha 1, V1 Beta 1, et cetera, to V1. But they don't maintain the same backwards compatibility at the V1 Beta 1 level. So GKE cluster and node pool were relying on V1 Beta 1 APIs, which the decision was made at the time because there was extra features, right? Because that was a less mature API, so they had additional things there. However, when some of those additional features became deprecated or removed by GCP, we were unable to upgrade to new versions of the SDK, which in turn meant that other resources that were dependent on that package were not able to receive new fields, right? New fields are added to the API types. So this was a pretty big blocker and was blocking implementation of a number of resources and a number of use cases. So it was kind of just a necessity to move those, the GK cluster and node pool to their V1 APIs. That's the GCP V1 APIs, not Crossplane APIs there. But because of that, as I mentioned, we did drop some fields and there were some changes on the GCP or the GK cluster and the node pool. And in this PR, I have a drop down where you can see the exact changes. We'll also have those in the release notes as well. Given that some folks rely on beta features for GCP, we have also started provider GCP beta, which will maintain the older functionality that we're removing in this PR. And will also, ostensibly in the future, as folks need it, support V1 Beta 1 APIs for other resource types as well. And we'll have the policy in that package that those API types will never reach V1, right? Because if GCP isn't making a commitment to compatibility, then we also cannot do so. So those will stay at alpha level most likely. So the idea is for the next release of provider GCP, we will simultaneously have the first release of provider GCP beta so that folks who currently consume those features that are being removed have the ability to, but we'll also get some new features in provider GCP. As far as kind of the protocol for going through a large breaking change like this, this is a break to our API guarantee for beta resources, which we certainly don't want to do. I will note that each of the providers right now is still, pre 1.0. So there's some versioning kind of leeway there. But this is something that, we're trying to provide a great experience for folks, and it's going to block us in the future. And so better to make this change earlier rather than later. And to do so, to notify folks, we've had an RFC open for over 2 months now leading up to this. And we've also announced it in Slack multiple times. That being said, if you have concerns, please reach out. We'll also be providing manual upgrade steps as well to consume this new version. So yeah, I think that's all of it.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Moff.
I was gonna say, we were talking about introducing a newly named like cluster resource in the provider GCP and dropping the GK cluster so that the CRs won't be deleted and you will have time to move to cluster resource while provider is running. Are we still doing that?
Yep, and that PR has been updated to move GK cluster to cluster. So I'm glad you brought that up, Mubafik, because this is something that's certainly relevant in terms of trying to, well, first emphasizing some of Crossplane's features, right? And also trying to make this the least dangerous upgrade process for folks possible. So if you have the current latest version of provider GCP installed, if you have GKE cluster instances that exist, when you upgrade, we've actually renamed the type as well as changed the API version to just cluster, which more closely matches the GCP API. What that means is that the new revision that gets created for your provider GCP package is going to not touch the old GK cluster API type. It's going to install a new cluster type, and you could start to consume that. But if you have existing GK cluster resources, those will basically sit there untouched. They just won't be reconciled because the older revisions controllers will be stopped. So that makes it such that if you for some reason are not on this call, for some reason haven't seen the communication or didn't see the release notes before upgrading, you should have the opportunity to see that you've gotten to an unhealthy state, and you can roll back to consuming the old functionality without breaking anything, which is definitely a nice feature that we get kind of out of the box with a package manager.
And Dan, you are the upgrade or migration, I suppose, steps, are those already documented, or we will merge this PR and then have those docs written up as well too?
It's my plan to merge this PR and potentially recruit some folks who are interested in this functionality to also kind of like test this out, since it is a large diff. We've obviously done the requisite testing that we typically do on any merges. But since this is a large breaking change, we'd like to have some bake time on the master branch with this. So the plan is to merge it and then add some of this documentation. This is also, of course, that documentation will be dependent on provider GCP beta, which we need to also have available and that sort of thing. But we will certainly have that documentation available before cutting a release of the provider.
Awesome. That sounds great. Yeah, I appreciate the attention that we've been paying to A, circulating this idea for feedback, and B, announcing it and kind of getting some awareness about it, but then C, possibly most importantly, the attention we're paying to migration steps and how to transition folks to the new versions that have this. So I definitely appreciate that effort, man.
Absolutely.
Okay. So yeah, then we already talked about the tags for AWS issue as well here too that Sean brought up. So then we can move on, I believe, to PR's discussion here as well too. Or actually, before we do that, we're about to start getting into some more of the technical conversations that are optional for attendees here. So before we kind of move into more of that stuff, does anybody have any other community high-level agenda items that they would like to bring up? Okay. All right. Well, let's move on here then to this PR here, Dan, that you wanted to bring up.
Yep. So this one, I think this is relatively non-controversial in my opinion. You'll see I have a pretty long write-up there in the commit message because this touches a few other areas of functionality that I think are important to highlight here. But essentially what this changes is if you roll forward to a new revision, so if you upgrade a package, this is changing for inactive revisions to not recreate resources if they don't exist. So this is primarily based around a situation where someone had installed a provider AWS version, and then they had used a, or even if you didn't use actually a V1 Alpha 1 or V1 Alpha any version CRD or instance of a CRD, and it was dropped in the next version, you'd find yourself in this place where you could potentially, well, first you'd have trouble upgrading, right? Because your new revision that dropped support for that alpha version and potentially added beta support for that resource would be trying to update a CRD, and basically the version exchange there doesn't work very well. So typically what folks have done in that situation is just delete the alpha CRD, and then the beta one just gets recreated in its place. And the way that active versus inactive revisions manage resources is active revisions become controllers. So they set a controller reference on their resources, and inactive revisions become owners. That being said, both of them, if a resource is not existing, they will recreate it. So that could get you in a situation where you had drop support for an alpha CRD type, and so you deleted it to allow the upgrade to proceed successfully. But the active and inactive revisions were battling over recreating that resource basically. And every time the inactive revision won, then you would basically be unable to update. And it's not super important that inactive revisions have their resource types existing if they're inactive, for instance. And the only way you would actually find yourself in this position is if you manually deleted that resource type anyway. So anyway, this is just updating to say if an inactive revision has a missing resource type, don't try and recreate it and proceed with just making sure your owner references are present on all resources that you install in your package that are present in the cluster. And like I said, there's a write-up there if you want to look more at why this is important / look at the original issue. The one other note I wanted to make about this is that this is related to discussions we've had around not installing alpha resources by default. And that could either be implemented at potentially the provider package level or at the package manager level. We're just saying, oh, this has a alpha version. We're not going to install it unless if you provide a specific flag on the package install. That being said, I view this as somewhat isolated because in that case, someone could still find themselves in that situation if they opted in to alpha resources. So anyway, this has been open for a bit, but I think it's pretty non-controversial. But if folks want to give that a peek, I definitely want this included in 1.3.
So Dan, that sounds reasonable, and I appreciate the thoroughness of thinking through there of like the complexity between inactive versions and all that sort of stuff. Right. Yeah, so the PR is linked here in the agenda doc. If folks want to take a look at that and add comments or feedback. So we can keep rolling here through the deeper technical discussions. Muaf, you wanted to talk about composition API change discussion.
Yeah. Yeah, can I actually take the screen?
You can take the screen. Let me stop sharing now. And we have 10 minutes left in this call here, so let's do our best to try to fit it in all in here, but we may need to break out and have another discussion if we go over.
Just want to provide a quick bit of background here. Muvaf, Dan, and I met to try and look at some of these PRs that are altering the composition API or updating, adding features to the composition API sort of holistically and see if there was any interactions between them or anything like that. We did realize afterwards that we had sort of, just because we're all co-workers, we got together to chat about this and we're like, oh, really wish that we had the folks who are actually working on these PRs here. So we're totally open to and would like to, in fact, have follow-ups with the folks who are working on these, which I think is Ben, Pratyush, and Stephen, to make sure that we hear everyone's take. With that, I'll hand it over to Muvaf.
Yeah, thanks for that background, Nick. So yeah, so this was the original document that we have talked over. So this is like, an example composition with all the changes that we have as open PRs. So this is like from many composite field paths with like, multiple sources and constructing a string. And there is this from constant value, and also from fn, which generates a random string with the character set here. So I think the biggest change is this first one. So there are like a couple things that we might be able to do, like a couple things that might enable us to develop more features on top of this in the future, while not making the API worse, essentially. So I think like one of the things that I was wanted to change was having these as strings directly, which limits our ability to add more details about them. And for example, one thing was when you have two strings, you can use like %s and %s, and if you want to use meta name twice, you have to include it twice here in the list as well. So after and also the name is well, this is kind of nitpicky, but maybe we could do a better job, because from many composite feel there's also two, and that is not many, you don't patch too many targets. So that's the reverse direction is not really that clear. So I want to show the thing that that is draft that we talked about, and get your opinions and ideas about it. So while we were talking about this, the other extreme was actually having Go templates here in the string and call the variables there directly. But we thought we may not need that immediately right now. So we could maybe start with an API that could be in the future extendable to have Go templates or other kinds of templating functionality. So maybe we could do something instead of string array, we could say these are struct, but for now this is only field path, which is essentially the same. But we could actually have more fields here. For example, a name field that would allow us to reuse it without adding it twice when we need it. And also a strategy to say hey, this is a string type combination, essentially, as we're open to suggestions for name as well, combine from composite, and the reverse direction would be combine to composite field path. So the combine is actually an action that we take here. And only like, this section is different than other patches. To field path is always like a single string. So that's kind of like, what we kind of thought about, like, drafting up and see what folks, especially Ben, who worked on the original PR, thinks about it.
Yeah, my reservations about the original PR were always around the API design, and getting that right, because after writing it, I did realize that it's like it adds quite a bit of complexity and isn't necessarily the easiest thing to understand straight away. So I like your suggested changes. I don't know exactly how that would change the implementation, like off the top of my head, but I like that as a plan. The only question that I have right now is how do you see the transforms applying alongside the combine from patch? Is a transform something that happens after the combine from is applied?
Yeah, so the output of this combine from is actually a single string, which is like, compliant with the current situation. Like right now, when you do a from field path, you get a single string and you pass it through transforms. So in this case, once, like, this, like, assume this as the from field path step. So it does some operations, gets the filters, but as a result, there's always like, one single string. And then, like, transforms don't need to change because it's always like one string that is passed through the transforms.
Yeah, one thing we were thinking about was it's a nice idea to try and reuse the transforms, but you probably ran into this, Ben, that not all transforms are always appropriate for combining things, sort of thing. So what we were thinking was we'd have one, it might make sense for us to have one specific sort of field that's just like, here's how you take all these things and combine them to one value effectively, whether it be a string or an int or whatever, that can then go into the transform pipeline if you need to do something with that. We were a little on the fence about whether there's any use cases where you might need to do multiple things, multiple steps to combine values, but we couldn't immediately convince ourselves that that was the case.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Ben.
I was going to say, it was always in the back of my mind that there might be a situation where you wanted to like map a value and then format it into a string. But the reality is that I've used Crossplane relatively heavily over the last couple of months, and I haven't run into a situation like that myself yet. So yeah, I mean, this makes a lot of sense to me. I definitely found that with the transforms, it was it was kind of tricky in some situations to work out what was being done by the patch and what was being done by the transformer pipeline on the patch sometimes. So it's if we're treating those two as like completely separate things, transforms only ever work on one value. You take one value and produce one value out, and any sort of combination of values is done by a dedicated patch type for that. I think that's a solid way of approaching it.
Yes, as Muvav said, one of the things that we sort of kept coming to here was, do we want to just sort of go hog wild and allow something like Go templates, which opens up a lot of potential power of like, loops and conditions and things like that all within the template. And I am always a big fan of keeping things as simple as possible until we know we need to do things. I think realistically, as far as I'm aware, and I'd love to hear folks chime in on the issue if they haven't already, but and I haven't read the issue in a little while, so I could have just forgotten. But as far as I'm aware, most people basically want this to work with IAM, where they have to, I think it's make an IAM policy document if I recall correctly. Not aware of like too many different use cases, but what we were thinking was that if possible, we prefer to go with sort of a simple limited functionality string format thing like we have today, but taking multiple sources, what we've been designing for, but to design in such a way that if that turns out to be too limiting, we could extend it in place to add a more powerful sort of templating support there without having to add yet another kind of patch that's like template or something instead of combining from whatever. So try to sort of keep things a little bit open for future.
Yeah. One additional thing I was thinking recent days, whether we need this strategy to be string or just FMT, because it's always string even if it's template. So maybe we could say this is strategy is FMT and then here FMT and give the the string, and if we end up with template, we could have template here and then give it a template.
I could imagine a case where, I'm not sure if this would be incompatible, but I could imagine a case where, for example, a very contrived case where you wanted to combine from multiple fields that were all integers and you wanted to add them all together, for example, where the output would actually be an integer of this patch rather than a string. So I don't know if we want to make the assumption that it'll always be string output.
Gotcha. So we're treating this as the type of output?
I don't think it necessarily has to be the type. Maybe it is. I could imagine potentially. Yeah, I don't know. Actually, maybe that is what it is. But I need to have more thought. But I think, for example, if you had several values that were strings, or even several values that were a mix of like strings and ints or something, you could pass an int as an option to like a string format thing. So we could change that strategy to format, like you said, and then have strategy template, strategy math, or whatever as different options rather than strategy string. But I guess I feel like it is what the intent of the field is basically how do you combine all these variables. So you could call that the type of combination, or you could call it the strategy for combination, but I don't think it necessarily means the type of the output value.
Gotcha. So you're saying we could have string here, and this could be, and differentiation function would be here string or template, and then here would be template, and maybe here go template or some other kind of template. So gotcha. Right, cool.
And both of which would obviously produce a string, but then you can imagine another one that was like strategy addition or something that just tried to add a bunch of integers together or something like that.
Right. Cool. Okay, so this seems to be the final API that we are all on the same page for this specific change.
Well, quick question for me. I think Ben brought it up, but I maybe didn't get it. So out of the combine from become the output of that is one string, and then that passed along to the transform pipeline there. But and then the FUMPT line 43 there has placeholders for two strings. Is that like a typo, or do I just not understand? How does the one input go into the?
Yeah, this is actually wrong. Let me edit it.
Yeah, the clarification is the output from the transform pipeline would just be a value, the same as the output from a from field path is a value. No guarantee that it's a string.
Got it. Okay, that makes more sense to me now. I thought I still didn't get something fundamental here. Awesome.
It's just left over from when we were editing it.
Got it. So quick note. So we were past the 1 hour allotted for the meeting here. This optional section here can continue to keep rolling on. So I'm not going to stop that now. But I just wanted to let folks know that we are out of time for the original hour. And if folks need to go hop off to do something else, folks are more than welcome. And thank you for joining today. Appreciate it.
So real quick, the other two things there were the from format and from constant value. We didn't get as deep into talking about those as we would have liked to. But basically, I'd like to set up a separate chat if folks have time with at least Pratyushan and Stephen to discuss them. These ones are kind of interesting for a couple of reasons. One is that most patches we found, because we didn't end up going with a distinct direction argument to say which way the patch is going, most patches end up needing to go in both ways, basically. But in these cases where it's a constant value or a random value, there's not really much point in patching that back to the composite, or rather, if you are patching that back to the composite resource. If you are wanting to patch a constant value back to the composite resource, it's probably not a value that's associated with any one particular resource, I would imagine. It's just a constant value, constant in the scope of the whole composition. So some of the stuff that we kind of flirted with and floated around was like, what if you just had like an array of variables or something like that in the composition that you could then reference in patches, or you could somehow patch them back to the composite resource. And that way you could, I don't know, there's also with like random stuff, do you want the random node to be generated like scoped to the composition so that everything that uses that composition uses the same random generated number, or do you want to generate a new one for each managed resource? How do we make sure that's persistent, et cetera, et cetera? There's a bunch of sort of subtleties, and it feels like these two things are closely related. So they seem like they could just use more discussion and thought sort of holistically to make sure we come up with a nice API for them.
Yeah, I think like additional to that, like from like the random string type may actually not be compatible with how like composition patching stuff works, because like it always assumes that like, you know, you set the value on the managed resource, but you don't read it back in the composite reconciler. So like, you know, maybe we could possibly have an exception there, like, hey, if there's a value, like generate random value in the managed resource, do not generate a new one, but that is like not immediately compatible with what we have. So we were also like questioning whether like, you know, we still need this functionality, because it would be really hard to implement in the composite reconciler. Okay, so it seems like we're running out of time for over 5 minutes. I will set up a different meeting for these two. I was hoping we could like, you know, get over them, but it seems like that's not the case. So yeah, hit me up on Crossplane Slack if you want to be invited to that meeting.
So for the one-to-many one that we just discussed, Muvaf, do you want to sort of maybe link or put a complete new version of that gist on Ben's PR? And then Ben, do you still feel good about taking the action to get that done? I want to balance. I'm happy for one of us to go do it because you've been waiting for so long, and I don't want to, you know, overload you, but also I want you to have the satisfaction of merging that PR.
That's all good. I'll have a quick look at it. If I get stuck, I'll shout up next week sometime. But yeah, I'm happy to continue.
Nice, thanks. That would be great.
Cool. I think that's it from me. And thanks you all.
Awesome, Moffick. Thanks for driving that, and thanks Ben for all the contributions and further finalization of the really compelling functionality of being able to combine in multiple sources into a single patch. So that's fantastic. Let me just bring up the agenda doc real quick on my screen again. I think that's this one here, and so I think a number of us have a hard stop in 7 minutes or so. But Dan, was there something, did you want to bring this up as well here too to just close us off for the meeting today?
I think I can just say that if folks are interested in that issue, they can take a look at Ben and I's conversation from today. My kind of thought process is we're just not going to make any changes here. But if folks feel passionately, this is kind of like a question of Crossplane's responsibilities in different situations from the package manager perspective. So if folks have dissenting opinions to that, I'd definitely love to hear them, because you know the direction we take with something like this could just inform kind of like our general philosophy. But I don't think we need to go into depth with it here.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, folks want to comment on that or continue the discussion, we can certainly pick that up. Yeah, and then Moffick, if when you're getting together folks for some of the other API changes here or API design elements, if you could post that on Slack as well too. You might have said that, but if you want to post that on Slack to get the word out about it, or encourage or invite other people to join, then that would be great.
Yeah, we'll do that.
All right. Lots of content, lots of good discussions, pretty packed in community meeting. So thanks everybody for joining in, discussing everything. We'll keep on working towards the end of the month here to do the 1.3 release. We'll see each other on Slack and on GitHub to keep working on these issues and designs and keep moving the project forward. So thanks everybody for joining today. It's good to see everybody.
Thanks, Jared.
Cool.
Yeah.